One Spicy Meatball by Sean Lansendorfer. The mob boss sat and made his order. His heavy breathing was an obnoxious constant between goading remarks and deriding that was not even veiled as friendly banter. His bodyguards loomed at either exit. One had a jackknife that he twirled around to stay busy, while the other rifled through a pulp magazine. The owner was there to personally grovel and offer his restaurant's finest dishes as he was forced to submit to the seat of power in this run-down neighborhood. It was after closing time, but one couldn't refuse when the dawn came a-knockin'. The waiter clenched his fist, having to swallow his pride as he served the man who took so much from him and would continue to do so. He laid down the first plate and watched as the Don's greasy fingers picked at the appetizer before it had time to even settle. The sight of the loathsome parasite had been a constant throughout his life, less a pillar and more an anchor. The larger man ate so quickly that one could scarcely believe he had time to enjoy any of it. There was no one left in the world who could chastise him for his manners. The owner poured him a glass of wine, and you could see the held-back tears strangled in his eyes at wasting such a vintage. This man was not to be respected but feared. He owned these blocks and ruled over them like a king.
"Where's that pretty little thing you had working here before?"
the Don asked while cleaning off the juices from his fingers with his mouth.
"She was a nice girl."
The owner couldn't face his waiter and so looked mournfully at his shoes.
"She went back home to Sicily with her mother. It's only Giorgio and me now."
Tony drank down his wine and grimaced.
"Sweet? Do I look like a Jew? Where is this wine from?"
The owner looked at the bottle quizzically, stepping away for a moment. The waiter placed the second dish abruptly and was struck cold by the response.
"What the hell is this?"
asked the mob boss. The waiter didn't have a thought in his head. The anger and fire in his belly had puffed out at the man's words, and he was left meek and confused like a child hearing his parents fight. The young man looked to the owner and back at the dish. This was their specialty. It came with every order. Is there a problem, sir?" he asked.
"You're damn right there's a problem. Get this trash out of my sight."
The mob boss spat. He was as red as the dish and started to breathe heavily.
"I haven't been so insulted in my own town in decades."
He coughed as his throat got tighter.
"You are finished. I'll make an example out of..."
He dropped. It was 1959, New York City. It was early Monday morning. The street was cordoned off, but that didn't stop a crowd from gathering just about as close as you could get. There was a body found, a heavy-set fella stabbed all to hell. Everyone knew him, Tony Gallo. He was the sort that was involved with this and that, had his finger in every pie. No one talked about it. There was a certain wisdom in not troubling yourself with what you couldn't control. That was the problem working in mob-controlled streets. You had plenty of witnesses, but no one saw anything. Tony wasn't a big fish by any means, but owned this part of town. He got what he wanted and kept the smaller gangs out, but was never more than the only bass in a small pond. Detective Franklin Russo was a young man, all things considered. He had known Tony since he was a kid. He'd come into the restaurant, order chicken Alfredo, and make him grind pepper until his forearms cramped. The bastard would walk out without paying after having everyone on edge for half the night. It was men like him who made Russo want to be a cop. The detective looked around. It was him and two other rookie officers on the scene. There was no one around greasing palms, so the deal was likely already made, and all the actual evidence was gone. The detective walked over to what was left of the ball of mott's that was Tony Gallo. He was more Swiss cheese now. He counted at least 12 stab wounds. The wife-beater Tony was wearing was the only thing keeping his intestines in. It was the first time his gut wasn't hanging out. His throat was slit from ear to ear. Detective Russo knelt, having to swat away the flies. He lifted Tony's arm gently and tried to figure the amount of rigor mortis that set in. He stood. The victim was dumped here in the middle of this territory as a message. The police officer standing by was trying to see what gave the detective that idea. How do you figure? It hasn't rained, and there isn't nearly enough blood. Tony's got gangs of flies, and he's stiffer than he's been in years, said Frank. Very good, said a shrill voice with a funny accent. You're brighter than most. Detective Russo turned to see a small woman in a wide-brimmed hat, round crimson glasses, and a coat she got lost in. Beside her was a stocky fellow with a beret and a chevron mustache. His dusty blue pinstripe suit was immaculate, and his shoes looked freshly polished. His eyes were dark pits in a gaunt and weathered face. The officer with them looked ready to crawl into the smallest box he could find and disappear. Sorry, Russo. The chief ordered me to bring them over. He says they're old friends. I don't care. This isn't a stop for the street tour. It's a crime scene, Russo snapped. Move them along. That is precisely why we are here, my friend, she said with what felt like baleful glee to the detective. My lady, I thought it was to try this cheesecake they boast of and to attend one of the baseball games, said the Frenchman. Well, yes, but there will be time for that later. Now, detective, your commandant asked us to aid your investigation, said the German woman. And I am not very fond of scenic views. This is the sort of thing I find more interesting. Not to intrude, monsieur, but a hasty end to this is preferable, said the Frenchman. These streets are not fit for my lady to linger. Oh, hush, she countered. I'm having fun. Now, detective, tell me what we are working with. Russo always had some sort of grimace, so nothing much changed on that front, but he grumbled out his answer. Who are you two supposed to be? And why should I bother filling you in? I don't need another pair of eyes on this, and I'm not a babysitter. The small German lady raised her glasses to reveal the milky whites of her eyes. I'm afraid my pair will not be of much use, but my mind is sharp. But I apologize for jumping ahead. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Lady Ilse van Malwerfberg, and this is my companion, Renard de Busson. Detective Russo grunted in both frustration and chagrin. I'm sorry, I didn't know. But this isn't the sort of case you two want to be getting involved in. The victim had ties to people neither of you should be dealing with. Hell, I shouldn't even be out here. I'm surprised it was even called in. I would not worry about any of that, my friend. We have no ties to this city, and will be off in short order. Now tell me what you see, insisted Elsie. Russo sighed. The victim is Tony Gallo. Ah, Elsie interrupted, noting the emotional baggage in just that answer. You knew him. What sort of man was he? The detective found this girl more annoying by the second. Yeah, I knew him, but I won't be speaking ill of the dead. These streets have ears. All fine. How did he die? She asked. From the look, He was stabbed multiple times before he was dumped here, answered Russo. Renard, what do you smell? She asked. Must I, my lady? The Frenchman grimaced. Yes, she insisted. Renard took a sniff. He is most certainly dead. Will that suffice, my lady? No. Do it right, said Elsie. You see, detective, my companion has a nose that can put a hound to shame. Is that right? Said Russo with smug disbelief. Does he do tricks? As far as I can tell, said Elsie with a smirk. Russo huffed. You had a ham sandwich for lunch, detective, with pickles and mustard. The bread was subpar, as was the ham. You have some greens in your teeth, said Renard. Now could you please turn your head? I must inspect the body. Impressed, detective? He could even tell you what cologne you are wearing, though he may not approve of your choice, she boasted. That's fine. But I don't know what he's going to figure out with just his nose, said Russo, checking his breath. This isn't all blood, the Frenchman noted. Half of it is tomato sauce. Russo took a look at the body. That wasn't blood on Tony's face. Sauce? He was eaten.
My thoughts exactly, said Elsie. His true cause of death was likely odorless. I can name you a few poisons.
She laid it out like bait, speaking with an uncomfortable amount of menace despite her stature and overall adorableness. The detective spoke. Tony Gallo never ate red sauce in all the years I've known him. He nearly strangled a waiter when he brought him some sugo rosso as an antipasto. Russo remembered how his father had to grovel so Tony wouldn't have his older brother killed. He didn't mention it, but saw the Frenchman take notice of his change in expression. It seemed his eyes were as sharp as his nose.
So, said Elsie, he was either in foreign territory where his tastes were not so well known, or was purposely insulted before being killed. So, that tells us nothing, since both possibilities are of equal pertinence. She turned to her companion. Renard, remember the notes of the sauce, and we shall visit the restaurants of the city until we find our place of death and the likely murderer. We are off. She made a big show of turning to go, whipping her coat around as if she were a magician about to disappear, or Wild West gunman in a quick draw. She held her arm out for Renard, who left her there awkwardly as he made his farewells. I believe my lady is feeling peckish, and that makes her quite silly. It is best we depart before her mood worsens to that of a feral cat, said the Frenchman. Until we meet again, monsieur. Elsie was pouting. Don't tell him that. You ruined my dynamic exit. Let us go swiftly now before you further shatter the mystique. Away! She waved her arms about, and her companion acquiesced, lending his arm to guide her. Russo watched as the pair made their way down the street before coming back to ask, what sort of restaurants are around here? Do you have any recommendations? Asked Elsie. The detective gave them a rough list of places to test the Frenchman's nose. Sal's is down the street, and Nona's is across from there. But I wouldn't waste my time there. There are at least 4 bakeries, though I don't see how that'll help. A pizzeria around the corner is run by La Donna, but I don't advise asking around there. There wouldn't be a body if Tony tried to cross her. That Puerto Rican joint uptown sounds like a good place to start. Or the diner if you like pancakes. The German girl made another attempt at a dramatic exit, but was still very blind. Her enthusiasm greatly eclipsed her understanding of fanfare and grace and motion. The detective felt a fool for waving goodbye, but Renard nodded as he led his mistress away. Russo was not overly optimistic about their chances since he was sending them in the wrong direction. Uptown and out of his way. It was a victory in itself. Now he could get to work. Russo knew the only people who would make a move on Tony were one of the big 3 in town. Tommy Two Tones and Carmine were the bigger fish, but La Donna was something else entirely. She was a shadow that loomed over the streets and was better left to her own devices. Plus, her husband Luigi, bless his soul, had the best sauce around and no idea his wife was the biggest crime boss in town. Not even Tony would refuse a slice from him. A troubling thought came to Russo. What gangs would come sniffing around first? While the big 3 would be the only ones who could strike with relative assurance, any 2-bit operation could try to slip in. This was likely the calm before the storm. Down the street walked Renard and his mistress Elsie. She had her stick but preferred to be led by the Frenchman arm in arm and saved the implement for dramatic pointing and effect. Tell me, was the detective handsome? She asked with a knowing smirk. Oh, no, my lady. I am afraid he was quite hideous, he lied. His coat did little to hide his hunchback, and his clubbed foot had him hobbling around. A shame for our children, then, she teased. Where are we eating? This Vito's you mentioned before? Asked Renard. No. The detective made a point of mentioning establishments strictly to deter us. And I know why. We are going to Sal's. Renard sighed. I assume Italian cuisine is all we're to expect in this big apple of theirs? Elsie pondered that. So, you don't think they will have... No, he cut her off. The lady's tastes were painfully German, and his French blood ran cold at the mention of those dishes. You will have to trust me to order something to your liking. They entered the establishment, and the hostess was happy to find them a seat. She was off to fetch their drinks soon enough. Nice voice, said Elsie, and the chair's comfortable. Do you see any blood or perhaps a spot that would look nicer with a rug before a certain incident ruined it? Does anyone carry the facial expressions of a killer? Guilt, suspicion, worry, intrigue, confusion, or some such? The Frenchman gave the place a look. No, my lady, it seems not. Shall we proceed to the next? It would be rude not to stay, she answered. I'm sure we can gather some information while we eat, and haste seldom benefits the hunter. Don't order anything with textures that will surprise me. She knew he wouldn't, but had a habit of micromanaging. Renard let that go without a comment. The waiter came for their order. The Frenchman spoke. She will have the minestrone to start and the stromboli, pre-cut. He then said a long string of Italian words, making sure to get the sauce in question. Elsie was very skeptical and had always been a picky eater. Her trust had been earned by the Frenchman, but she knew he would always try to expand her palate sneakily and make her eat greens. She gestured to the waiter before he left. Do you know Tony Gallo? The young man gulped. Yeah, we all knew him. What's it to you? I'm investigating his murder, she boasted. Do you know anything? I heard what happened, said the waiter with a sneer. I can't say I'll miss him. Gloria will be happy. He'd hound her every second he was here. He was about to spit, but was at work, so he walked outside to denounce the man. He headed straight into the kitchen from there. Seems I struck a nerve, Elsie noted. It's for the best. I'm hungry. Do you recall the body's skin? Must we, my lady, during a meal? Yes, she said. I didn't notice anything besides the usual mélange of the macabre. No discoloration or any of the usual signs of poison, said Renard. Well, that's no fun, she pouted. The poison made that murder in Munich so very simple. So I suppose it isn't all bad. But we agree it wasn't the stab wounds, correct? Indeed, he said. The blood had long coagulated. It was made to look gruesome to divert attention. The waiter returned with Elsie's soup. For the lady. Be careful, it's hot. Thank you, sir, she said while pawing at the table to discern the position of the plate. Her finger had barely grazed the bowl before she pulled back, swearing in German. Height! Is this soup or magma? Good Lord! The waiter looked to be in the midst of moving in several directions, to fetch napkins, secure the plate, and comfort the lady. He managed to do none of those things, from sheer paralyzing panic. Renard stood, wrapped his napkin around her plate, and placed it perfectly for her, along with the spoon in her hand. The waiter rushed to fetch a replacement serviette. Elsie tried to laugh it off. My, where do these waiters get their hands? I don't doubt you can serve a flame to a piece of wood. She carefully prepared to eat and circled the edge of the bowl with her spoon to get the coolest ring of soup. I want to see that plate clean, my lady, said Renard. I would like to see this plate clean myself, she mumbled before loudly slurping up her soup. She knew how that bothered him. The Frenchman was handed his food and made his usual inspection, scrutinizing presentation, consistency, and portion all at a glance before he even had a taste. Elsie knew well enough her companion would be at this for hours. No dragging this out, I want to make it to the bakery before it closes. They say the water in the city gives the bread its taste, she said with wry humor. I would assume sewage has a taste, but I wouldn't wear it as a badge of honor, Renard said before finally trying the food. The welcome bell rang with the opening of the door. It was like the energy of the room was sucked out. Even Elsie took notice without needing to see the hostess go pale. The Frenchman caught a group of men entering the establishment from his periphery. He could sense there was going to be trouble. The waiter looked unsteady on his feet. He rushed to get the owner. The proprietor, Sal himself, stepped out. "Gentlemen, how can I help you?" The men looked to be the three most stereotypical mob goons possible. The suits, the hair, the attitude. A neon sign around their neck flashing criminal would have been subtler. "I'm sure you've heard the news of the dearly departed. Get us your finest table, and we can discuss the future," said the shorter man in front of his pair of goons. Sal was ready to play the sycophant, but looked too old to endure the stress. "Allow me to show you to your table." His voice was meek with acceptance. The men were escorted to where they would dine, and made themselves at home, lighting cigars and perusing the menu. Elsie wrinkled her nose at the smoke. When is the rest of my food coming?" Renard was always rather stoic, but grew stern, though spoke to her calmly all the same. "You must eat up, my lady. Finish your soup, and the next course will be here before you know it." "Why, am I still growing? I believe that ship has sailed," she joked. "Hush now, my lady. I believe there may be some trouble," said Renard. The leader of the gang puffed on his cigar. "Your deal with Tony will be carried along by us. Any and all payments will be rendered to us, and you will have the honor of our protection. Now thank me." Of course. Thank you, gentlemen," said Sal. "I'll fetch something for you to start with." "Not so fast," said the boss. "I like to settle business before pleasure. Bring me what you owe me now, and then we can all eat and be married together. I'll even let the pretty ones sit on my lap." Sal went pale. "But I already paid Tony for the month. I don't have any more." The boss's face lost any hint of graciousness and mirth. "Well, that just won't do. Here I am, ready to do right and hold up my part, and you plan to stiff me. You can't get something for nothing round here." He gestured to his goons. They stood. One pulled the tablecloth out, but did so quickly enough to spare what was on the table. He did a double take, then brought an arm across the surface, sending the plates, utensils, and flowers crashing to the floor. The other goon grabbed a vase and smashed it. "Please, no!" begged Sal. Elsie hadn't finished her soup and was startled by the sudden crash. Renard stood up. One of the goons walked over and put a hand on the Frenchman's shoulder. "Hey, old man, step outside. We need to have a chat with your daughter." Renard twisted the gangster's wrist around and brought him to the ground. It was a quick punch that had his head bounce off the floor. The other goon was surprised and took a swing, or he would have if his legs hadn't been taken out from under him. Renard slammed him into the ground and was about to pop his arm out of its socket. The boss reached into his coat to pull out a revolver. He held the Frenchman at gunpoint. "Pretty spry for an old-timer, but you messed with the wrong people." Elsie had finished her soup. "I'm ready for the strumpet or stromboli or whatever it is. But first, are you the one who killed Tony?" "Tony got what he deserved," the boss answered. "Simple as that." "Ah, so you don't know either. You're an opportunist," she noted. "I would choose my words carefully, sweetheart," he said, adjusting his aim. "What? I didn't say vulture." "There's nothing wrong with an opportunist," she argued to cover the sound of a bell. "For example, I knew where this detective was going to go and had my companion bring me here first." The boss looked confused. "Detective?" "Freeze! Drop the gun," shouted Detective Rousseau. He was in cover by the door and had his revolver trained on the boss. The man reluctantly surrendered. Elsie and Renard were escorted outside, and arrests were made. The detective went right to them. "What are you two doing around here?" "I thought you were heading uptown," Rousseau said with his hands on his hips like a mother scolding children. "It was clear you were leading us astray, so it only made sense to go the complete opposite way," said Elsie, matter-of-factly. "Sal's was your first one mentioned, and you very quickly struck it off the list of points of interest." Rousseau grimaced. "Is this a game to you?" "There was a gun in your face not 5 minutes ago." "Oh, I hadn't noticed," said Elsie dryly. Rousseau snapped. "We aren't solving this. Our best bet is to just get by without any more trouble. Sal is your father, detective, and you came straight here to clear your conscience, or, if necessary, bury the evidence. Well, I have good news. There wasn't any. The murder wasn't here. Renard confirmed that much, but it got me wondering. Every boss has his henchmen. I find it hard to believe Tony Gallo was alone. Where are his right-hand fellows?" The detective had no good excuse and grumbled. "Think you're smart, huh? Well, you're right about one thing. He always had 2 guys with him, Dominic and Johnny Jackknife. I suppose I owe them a visit." "Excellent," said Elsie. "Let us go, post-haste." "My lady," said Renard with a tone that left little to argue. "Fine, fine, duty calls," she said. "I have a prior engagement, so we will leave the rest to you, detective." That was the best news he had heard all day. It seems he had finally shaken these two for good. The duo left Rousseau to make the rounds, asking old friends, trusted contacts, gossips, and bums. Right as it seemed the bodyguards of the late Mr. Gallo had vanished without a trace, the two popped up on the street as the new leaders of Tony's gang. The body of the man they had worked for since they were boys had been in the morgue for only a night. Detective Rousseau started early the next day, but hadn't taken 2 steps out the door before he heard the shrill whine of the German woman. "Good morning, detective. I presume you are going to visit our friends and the proud new leaders of this little street gang. May I suggest a venue?" Rousseau didn't waste time glaring. "I know where they'll be. I suppose you do as well." "The scene of the crime," said Elsie. "A fine dining experience, or so I've heard." "To die for," said the Frenchman with a wry smile, before clearing his throat when no one laughed. "Let's take a walk," said Rousseau. He didn't like being used, especially when it led to the 2 pests' further involvement. The detective led them down his streets, the whispers of unspoken history. This was a stew that had been boiling for decades, carrying traces of what came before as more was added in each day. The kids running around playing didn't know it, but that story would affect how they grew up and what their beliefs would be for the rest of their lives. Frank lived in the shadow of Tony Gallo without even realizing it. It was there in how his parents acted when the brute came around, how the energy became thick enough to weigh you down. You'd be told to run along or go back in the house. That feeling taught you something that lingered closer to instinct than memory, like a rabbit knowing when the hawk was circling. There would always be another Tony. There have been countless since and more to come. Even the blind girl could feel it, he thought. "Is it terribly far?" asked Elsie, having to take long, unconfident strides to keep up. "Oh, I'm sorry," said Rousseau after being pulled back from introspection. "It's just 1 more block." Everyone knew the route Gallo took, and it was just a matter of asking around about where he hadn't been before his murder. Rousseau didn't elaborate on that, but didn't have to. He knew roughly when the murder happened, and every sauce worth a damn in the city was like a fingerprint. The color, the scent, the taste, even the stain. He knew where to go. "Obviously we're headed down the tire-trodden trail of our dear brute," said Elsie as if having read his mind. "You are quite useful for grunt work, mein detective. I'm glad you figured it out before I had to have Renard sniff around and put you and your mutts to shame." My lady does enjoy delegation, said Renard with the melancholy of a wary father. She could have very well conquered the world if she went so lazy. I'm seeing that now, said Rousseau, sans amusement. Giuseppe's restaurant is where we are headed. That's a probable scene of the crime, but I don't see how the old-timer would have done it. Every act has a motivation, Elsie stated matter-of-factly. Even madness can be a cause that overtakes what seems a good and even noble man. And a life is easy to take, simpler than you'd expect. It is the soul that keeps us from the barbarity, but the mind and heart that drive such drastic actions. You don't understand, said Rousseau. The old-timer wouldn't even swat a fly. I've seen him escort the pests out with a lick of honey rather than raise a hand. Besides that, Tony outweighs him 3-1. He'd have snapped Giuseppe in half or even holding a knife in his presence. And that is the beauty of it, Elsa beamed. Finding the means, the logic of an act. How could a doddering geriatric take down a figure of greater force and power? I'm betting poison, though that comes with its own complications. Do you believe him capable of making elaborate traps or contraptions? It troubles me how excited you are, Rousseau sneered. As you should, Renard agreed, imagining seeing the signs in adolescence and failing to curb them then. I wept many a night knowing what she would become. Now, said Elsie playfully, though she bristled at gossip at her expense. It's in the name of justice and law. Surely, said Rousseau dismissively. Let's just get there and discover what we can. The blind girl smirked as the detective led them to a fine dining establishment that they suspected had served Tony Gallo's last meal. A young waiter was there to greet them, upon the chiming bell of the door. Good morning. We don't open until 11, but you can make your orders, and I'll have the chef get started when he gets in. Giorgio, we aren't here to eat, said the detective. The young man looked in good spirits before, but hadn't held up much of a poker face. Oh, well, Mr. Rousseau, what do you need? What do you know about Tony Gallo? Asked Frank Rousseau with every intent to frighten the lad. He's trash. I got what he deserved, said Giorgio, with no uncertainty but a faltering bravado. You served him his last meal, said Elsie. How did... She interrupted him and spiritedly pointed the wrong way, but in the general area. Don't lie, boy. Speak up and speak true. He didn't eat that much. The fat bastard usually cleans us out, said Giorgio. But you served him something with tomato, and he blew his gasket, Rousseau interrupted. But then what happened? He dropped like a sack of potatoes, but pushed away his goons when they ran to help, Giorgio insisted. He went to the bathroom, saying he was fine. That's the last I saw him. Giuseppe entered and looked upset to see his young waiter being harassed. You people, what are you doing here? We aren't open yet. Go away. Old man, said Frank in an effort to ease him, we aren't going to hurt him. He isn't in any trouble. I'm just here to know what happened to Tony Gallo. He came for his usual pound of flesh. Where were you then? Cried Giuseppe. He ate and stormed out. We know nothing. Now go. The detective nodded and raised his hands in a show of compliance. I'm sorry to upset you, but I'll be back with a warrant if need be. With that, Frank stepped out. And you too? Asked Giuseppe. Do you serve lunch? Said Elsie with a wide smile. I would kill for a bit of liverwurst and a boiled egg. She's kidding, Renard insisted. She had a substantial breakfast. All right, said Elsie. Can you at least tell me which way they went and what he had eaten? Giuseppe was still upset, but would not be rude to a lady. Mr. Gallo had not much more than wine, as far as I remember. He said it was too sweet, so I went back into the kitchen to try it, and it tasted fine. Such an expensive vintage, wasted. God rest his soul. By the time I came back, they went out the back and headed left. His men were carrying him out. Now please, leave us in peace." Elsie tipped her hat, and off they went, out the door and down the street. As they walked, the Frenchman sighed. "Must I? You wouldn't have me searching the dumpsters for knives, would you?" said the Cheshire Cat. Renard removed his jacket. There were tears in his eyes. The smells of a New York alley were a mix of every vile stench and a lacquered portrait of filth. "I wish I'd died in the war," cried the Frenchman. He followed the smell of copper to a pair of knives, though it wasn't the first. They must have found evidence for half a dozen other crimes, but none other had the scent of Giuseppe's cooking. "The guards took the knives from the back and carved up their leader like a Christmas bird," Elsie noted. "The question then is why, my lady," said Renard. "I struggle to see loyalty be so fleeting after so long a tenure of service." "Not all are as steadfast as you, my friend," Elsie countered, "but perhaps you are right. If these men were wronged, it could lead to a betrayal, but it would have to have eroded away at the years of stalwart subservience, either a sudden break or a gradual fissure between them and their leader." "I say, my lady, could it be an act of honor instead, a mercy-killing?" "Now that is interesting," said the blind girl, unsure of what to do with her hands. "And so we are on the hunt." Detective Frank Russo was walking down the street. He had expected the foreign pair to follow him, but was unconcerned to find that they hadn't. He had an old gang to pay a visit to. Frank knew all the streets, all the hideaways, every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Dom and Johnny were who you needed to track down, and they had reappeared in so grand a fashion. He knew those punks since grade school. But now the word was out that they were trying to usurp Tony Gallo's position as king of the neighborhood. The detective walked with purpose, each stride stealing his resolve. This was not a get-together of old friends. His best bet would be to visit their mothers and talk all this over a meal, and that was just what he was going to do. Frank knocked on the door, and it all but burst open. There was a little old woman holding a wooden spoon. "Little Frankie, is that you? Come in, come in. Dominic was just telling me how he got a raise at the plant," she said excitedly. The detective was ushered in and sat at the table. Every old lady on the block seemed to have the same house, over-furnished to the point of clutter, and as many pictures of Jesus as there were of family. Dominic was at the table eating lunch, dressed a little nicer than he usually was, and not sporting the usual scrapes and bruises. Dom was a brawler. If he wasn't roughing up for Tony, he was down at the gym going a few rounds. That's how he got in the business, roughing up folks for loan sharks and debt collectors. "Well, if it isn't Frankie Bag of Donuts, how the hell are you?" asked Dominic knowingly. "It's been a long time." "Oh, it's so nice to see you boys together again," beamed Mrs. Romano as she set down a plate of food, the healthy serving of 3 different leftovers that ensured that there was no bit of real estate left on the porcelain. "How have you been these days? Your mother says you're a big-time detective." "I've had my ups and downs, Mrs. Romano, but I'm doing good work out there." "You should talk to Dominic. He might be able to get you a job at the factory," she boasted. "The union." She emphasized that point with another spoonful of ravioli. Dominic smirked. "What do you say, Frankie? Want to work with me and Johnny?" He grabbed a cannoli and took a large bite, managing to make the act look threatening. "Oh, that Johnny," she said. "He's so funny." Mrs. Romano knew her son didn't work in the factory, but would do whatever she could to delude herself. He didn't have the heart to break the fantasy. Dom looked ready to make a poorly veiled threat, but had his mouth full. So he got a solid smack on the back of his head for his trouble. "Mind your manners, you'll make a mess. And I'll have to work all night to get the stains out of your shirt," said Mrs. Romano as she doted on her son. Frank was not rude and ate what he was given, though he locked eyes with his one-time friend. He looked so smug, and it killed Russo's appetite. The detective spilled some sauce on his shirt and made a show of looking embarrassed. Mrs. Romano rushed to him and demanded that he take off his shirt so that it wouldn't stain. Frank went along with it and sat back down in his wife-beater, face to face with his old friend as the older lady ran off to work her magic. Let's talk about Tony. Dominic didn't lose that smirk. Rival gangs work. We took care of them quick and clean. So clean that I won't find a trace of them, huh? Almost like they never existed. Tell me what really happened. No bullshit. Ha! You want to hear it? The old man was losing it. Forgetting. Didn't know where he was half the time. In that routine shakedown, he got so mad that he shit himself. He was so embarrassed that he had us carry him out. So how is it we found him like Caesar on the street? Asked Frank pointedly. Another gang, like I said. We took care of it. But does it really matter? Now are you going to finish your food, or are you going to break my mother's heart? Frank chuckled. We wouldn't want that now, would we? He got back to eating, but knew the mood had shifted. Old friend or not, he was asking too many questions. Mrs. Romano returned soon enough, and the detective had to disappoint her by cutting the visit short. He stood and dressed. The food was delicious as always, ma'am, but duty calls. "Ah, well, it was lovely to see you. Say hello to your mother," she said as she gave the officer a hug and a kiss on each cheek. "Let's have a meal at Giuseppe's soon, Frankie. What do you say?" asked Dominic. "My treat." "Oh, that's a wonderful idea," said Mrs. Romano. "We can all sit and talk like the old days, like in your papa's restaurant." Dominic was smiling, but his eyes had shifted to something cold and sinister. Tony was a terrible man, but never one to shake the boat during smooth sailing. The two who had taken his place may not have the same relative tact. There were bridges to burn and moves to make. Russo thought through the talk on his way out of the building. He was back on the street soon enough, but could tell he was being followed. The footsteps were clear and purposeful. The pursuer wanted him to know of his approach. Frank gulped back a bit of fear. It was a crowded street with kids playing and folks going about their day. The sun was shining and it was a damn shame someone had to die. He felt his hand twitch. This wasn't the time to make a move. There were too many thoughts going through his head. It would get him killed. This was Johnny with his jackknife. And if it came to it, Frank couldn't take him. The mob hitman was within 15 feet and would be on him before he could draw his gun. The detective turned down an alley. The attacker was on him in a rush. Russo pulled his gun with his left hand and was jammed up before he could get a shot. Johnny took out his knife with unparalleled finesse and flair, but felt the cold steel slip between his ribs and the warm feeling of oozing life. He smiled. "You kept your knife, old boy." "Of course, you were always faster. It was my only shot," said Frank. "You going to finish it?" Russo pulled back before Johnny could slit his throat, and knew he couldn't hesitate in pulling the trigger. Old times, old grudges, and an old friendship demanded he act. He had played this game 1,000 times, but this time was for blood. Elsewhere, Elsie and Renard snuck into Giuseppe's restaurant to confirm a suspicion. The Frenchman did not like working outside the law, but had plenty of experience doing so. He was also well aware of how his mistress could get when she didn't get her way. They heard a series of gunshots ring out in the distance, but this was New York after all, so they got back to what they were doing. Renard climbed out of a small window and landed with the grace of a dancer. He returned with a can of antifreeze as commanded. Elsie was squatting in the alley, petting a furry friend. "My lady, get away from that rat!" snapped Renard as he shooed away the pest. "Oh," said Elsie as she stood. "I thought it was a cat." She wiped her hand on her coat, though she was wearing gloves. "Did you find it?" Yes, my lady, but it is common to have a can around. I do not feel it is sufficient evidence.
Tell me this, Elsie dramatically exclaimed. How much wine do you pour in a glass?
A little more than half to allow it to breathe, and the aroma to have a space to waft, said the Frenchman with authority.
And it takes nearly as much antifreeze to be lethal in one dose. It would be too obvious in the wine, thickening it and distorting the taste. We had an attempted murder before the genuine event, said the German woman. To poison wine should be punishable by death, Renard seethed. Could it have contributed to the death? Exaggerated symptoms or progressed things? Indeed. I believe I know what happened, she said with her toothy smirk. The door to the back of the building opened up. Heading back to the restaurant was Detective Rousseau, bleeding from the side. Johnny was too quick and too good to get away with without incident. However, his flair proved to be his undoing, with his priority for superficial wounds as a flourish before the kill. A wound demanded its answer, but greater disrespect required humiliation to satisfy honor. It proved the line between life and death. Frank put pressure on the wound and headed to Giuseppe's before Dominic could tie up that loose end. His shirt was red with blood, and the nick in his brow had poured crimson over the side of his face. He threw open the door, and the bell rang out like an alarm. There was Dominic, just as he feared, sitting at a table with a gun pointed at the door.
"Long time no see,"
said Dominic with a grin. Rousseau was at the door and not quick enough in his state to best the man. He was far from a quick draw. Johnny says hello. Dominic laughed. He was bound to get beaten one of these days. He would have been glad it was you and not some new kid on the block looking to make a name. Did you already kill him? He asked.
No,
said Dominic.
The service in here is lousy.
In the alley, Giuseppe was yelling at Giorgio, who had stumbled upon the two investigators while taking out the trash.
"My boy, how could you? To poison a man in here, our livelihood. This is a place of service, hospitality, and family, and you dishonor us both with breaking that sacred trust."
"You know what that pig did?" Giorgio shouted as tears flowed freely from him. "He'd never stop. He did it again and again, and everyone just pretends it never happened. Well, I can't anymore." Giuseppe brought the young man into a hug.
"This is my fault. I will say I did it. No one cares for an old man's honor. My boy, go home."
"Not to interrupt," said Elsie as she did that very thing, "but he didn't kill him. The amount in the wine was barely a sip from a new can. They will find the receipt but rule it out as cause of death." "Not unless I pour it out and turn you in myself," said Dominic at gunpoint. "You idiots make this too easy." He shoved Rousseau into the alley with the others. "What a shame such a young man poisoned my old boss and shot down everyone when confronted. It almost brings a tear to your eye." "Care to save me the trouble of explaining things?" said Elsie.
"Why would I bother?"
Dominic asked, as if the notion were incredulous.
"You'll all be dead in a minute."
He moved the gun toward Renard.
"Now pour out that can and say your prayers."
Elsie was pouting. She would have to explain things later, but first,
"Look out! Behind you!"
shouted the blind girl. Dominic almost turned and couldn't help but chuckle to himself. What a ridiculous strategy.
"Ha! You got some guts, but now you're going out like Tony. Come una scemo."
The mob man was shaking his head and trying to stifle his roused humor, but to no avail.
A schoolyard distract.
However silly, it did give Renard the time to brain him with the can. The Frenchman was quick, and the antifreeze had dinged off the gunman's head and sent him falling like a sack of potatoes. "I assumed it worked," said Elsie with a pause. "Well then, Tony Gallo died of a heart attack and would have been remembered as a man who soiled himself and expired in an alley from being too fat for too long.
His men were asked to grant him a final mercy and make it look like he at least died like a man of his idiom ought to. You know, that drivel men always go on and on about. The rest of them all stood there thinking it over. "So I didn't do it?" asked Giorgio. "No," said Elsie. "He only put enough antifreeze in his wine to sweeten it a bit. He would have had all the symptoms of being drunk without the floaty feeling." She never drank except for a hot toddy when sick, but spoke with a confidence suiting her arrogance. Russo was still bleeding and getting a bit woozy. He had handcuffed Dominic in the meantime. "Let's get this over with," he mumbled. "Get me to a doctor, or kill me yourself." "No need to be dramatic," said Renard. "I'll have you patched up and singing your little songs again in no time. Going on and on about love and food." Giorgio looked confused. Do we really sing songs like that?" Giuseppe waved the thought away. "What a lark! The Tories are just jealous. The French only sing about the friars and the plucking of birds. That or sorrow and the constant heart to break. The sour grapes go with the wine." Renard stepped back out to have words. "You Italian mouse, you want to say that again? Your crude swill is like your women. Loud, bold, and voluptuous unto parody. Nothing like the refinement and subtlety of a French wine. Ha! You have a nerve. I say that your wine is indeed like your women, thin and unappealing. Shall I add overpriced? Better than your cheap? Please!" shouted Russo weakly. "I'm dying here." "Such tribalism," said Elsie with a shake of her head. "This is why I don't drink." Dominic Romano was arrested for the attempted murder of an officer of the law, among other things. Young Giorgio was sentenced to 6 months of community service for his accidental use of harmful substances, but given leniency and special consideration for his assistance in the arrest of Mr. Romano, and on the word of one of New York's finest. Detective Russo is expected to make a full recovery, and was very appreciative of the flower scent. He hopes to never again meet those 2 foreign sleuths, but he could not deny that their involvement led to a relatively successful investigation. Not being stabbed would have been preferable and a clear strike against the operation. The streets lived on, past old grudges and any man, no matter how all-consuming he seemed at the time. Russo would be back out there among changing tides soon enough, older and wiser, but always a step behind whatever came next. Elsie and Renard had their cheesecake and attended their game. They were off to the next city to explore and find their amusement. The wealthy Lord Malwolfberg would not deny his daughter anything. Giorgio and Giuseppe ran their business in peace for many years to come, and introduced a new blueberry gelato in honor of Tony Gallo, dubbed the Antifreeze, and a fried stromboli in red sauce called the Heartstopper. All agreed it was in poor taste. The end.